Good afternoon, Diego. I hope you're doing well.
Yeah, I'm glad to be back. How about yourself, Vish?
Well, it's been a minute, man, and since we had our last session, I figured this would be the perfect opportunity to sort of reconvene and talk about some developments in immigration law. You know, President Trump has been sworn in, so we have a lot of new news coming in every day.
Yeah, it's very timely. There's a lot happening right now. So, is there anything specific that caught your eyes, or anything that you want to talk about this time around?
Well, with this presidency, every day is something catching my eye, but one common trending topic that really caught my eye in immigration law is Trump's recent executive order challenging birthright citizenship via the 14th Amendment. So it's very interesting because it impacts immigrants of all backgrounds, all categories. And let me ask you this, but do you know anything about birthright citizenship, what it is, and the 14th Amendment?
Yeah, it effectively gives citizenship to any individual whose parents are alien residents of the United States, but whose children were born in the United States. And now that Trump is coming in with this new executive order, I was doing a little research on it. It's called Protecting the Meaning and Value of American Citizenship. He's trying to challenge that framework to remove that right to citizenship for people who are coming in on visas, who are here undocumented, so that their children do not have right to access that citizenship. And the consequences of this are far-reaching.
Correct. And you've sort of summarized this, and we can take this step by step, but basically, birthright citizenship is a bedrock constitutional principle. And when we say bedrock in the legal field, what we mean is that it's a fundamental right. It's been so ingrained for so many years in US law that people just assume that it's going to stay there.
Yes.
It's almost like the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms, or the First Amendment, which is freedom of speech and religion, right? So 14th Amendment, as you've alluded, is all about many sort of the due process rights. And one of the biggest due process rights is the right of citizenship that one gets by being born in this country.
Mm-hmm.
And specifically, if you kind of look at the monitor, we have President Trump's executive order here that he issued on January 20th, 2025, quite recently. And he states in this order, quoting the 14th Amendment, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. So you have dual citizenship in the sense of American citizenship. You have the federal foundation and you have the state foundation. You're the citizen of the state you're living in,
Yeah.
and you're a citizen of the country, meaning the U.S. that you reside in, if you're born. However, President Trump is now challenging this bedrock constitutional foundation by seeking to exclude, as you have said, undocumented immigrants, and in many cases, even documented aliens, right? Meaning those who are holding visas. And how he's looking to do that is, and this is what we're going to discuss in this video, is essentially what are the exceptions, if any, in the 14th Amendment, right? Because it's not as tightly bound as we like to assume.
Mm-hmm.
I've spoken to many lawyers, constitutional specialists, right? And everyone's arguing how unconstitutional what President Trump is doing, right? How unconstitutional his actions are. And prima facie, it's absolutely true. It is unconstitutional. You're taking away a bedrock constitutional foundation. However, the law is not so black and white. There's always gray areas. There's always exceptions where you can exploit. And sometimes, in this case, not expand the interpretation and the powers of the 14th Amendment, but contract it, make it less, right? And so, yeah, let's just start analyzing the 14th Amendment and letting all of the good folks who follow us and watch our content know exactly how successful President Trump can be. We're going to be the devil's advocate. We're going to talk about what he will do, likely, as he sort of progresses with this executive order. Because I'm sure you're aware, this order got a temporary restraining order, and there was a lawsuit filed against President Trump the minute he filed it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, in fact, we have it popped up over here, actually. Okay, let's zoom in on the screen. This was filed in the district court in the Western District of Washington at Seattle, right? It's a TRO. So you know what a TRO is, right, Diego?
Yep. Restraining order, effectively blocking an executive order
Exactly.
for a limited amount of time.
Exactly. So it's like a preliminary injunction,
Mhm.
but it's even more effective than one. Because with a preliminary injunction, you have a higher standard to prove. The TRO, you're getting right down to the meat and bones of an argument. You're saying, listen, this is blatantly unconstitutional. We need to stop this from being implemented while we're adjudicating it in the courts.
Mhm.
Right? And this was issued, basically, they're saying they're going to suffer irreparable injury, the plaintiff, right? The TRO is based on typically plaintiffs who are going to get affected by this amendment. And there's many similar plaintiffs, there's lawsuits all across the country, right? So people are already challenging it. But the question is, and sort of what we are going to talk about today, can President Trump prevail despite all the opposition he has? And it's important discussing in any legal argument the pros and cons of any position, right? We generally tend, as human beings, we tend to favor one side or the other. However, it's always good to know what the opposite side is going to argue. Therefore, you can be better prepared in court. And I haven't seen many legal scholars argue how President Trump can be successful. I've seen countless arguments on how he's not going to be successful. So let's start with the first provision of the 14th Amendment, right? So as I've stated, the 14th Amendment is pretty clear cut. If you're born here, it doesn't matter who your parents are. As long as you were born in the United States, you are a citizen. And typically what immigrants have done in the past is they have children here, and then when they turn 21 or older, they sponsor their immigrant parents into becoming U.S. citizens down the line,
Mhm.
right? The term has been offensively labeled as anchor babies, right? Basically anchoring you to the United States and having children. However, President Trump wants to get rid of it by claiming that, and he's going to cite a statute called the Alien Enemies Act, right? 8 U.S. Code Section 1442, Alien Enemies. And what he's specifically citing here, the argument he's making, is that undocumented immigrants are, number one, he's going to argue in multiple dimensions, and not subject to the jurisdiction of. So he's first trying to argue that they're not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. They're transiting to the United States. They're going through it, right? He's probably not going to be successful with that argument. I mean, the minute you set forth in the lands of and the territories of the United States, you're still subject to it. And we know this because, for example, Native Americans have their own quasi-independent government, right? They have their own federally registered tribes. And these tribes are almost considered to be a sovereign country within a country.
Mhm.
But they're still subject to the federal laws of the United States. Their own laws, let's say hypothetically, if they contradict federal law would effectively preempt their own laws unless they can challenge the constitutionality of the federal laws, right? So similarly, President Trump, if he makes the argument that, if an illegal immigrant is going to transit through the United States, they're not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States, that's likely not going to fly. President Trump is not as dumb as what many of his opponents like to think, right? He's smart. In my legal opinion, I think what he might argue is he's probably going to go for, they're subject to the jurisdiction, but there are two exceptions to the 14th Amendment that don't allow birthright citizenship. And do you know what those exceptions are?
They don't come to mind right now. What would those be, Vish?
Okay, so there's two specific exceptions. And this is noted in the famous Supreme Court case, United States v. Wong Kim, right? And this case was about on the Chinese Exclusion Act. You had an individual who his name is Wong Kim Ark. He was born in San Francisco to parents who were both Chinese citizens, but they were living in the United States, right? And at the age of 21, he returned to China to visit his parents who were previously in America. So he was in America, they were in China, but they gave birth to him while he was in America, right? So Chinese parents who gave birth to a quote-unquote U.S. citizen at the time, right?
Mhm.
But because of the Chinese Exclusion Act, they denied citizenship to Chinese immigrants. It was a racist act. They wanted to prevent the demographic rise of people of Asian background at that time, right? So the question in this case was that, can he become a U.S. citizen even though he was out of the U.S. at the time he turned 21? And he was denied entry on the U.S. because they were saying you're not a citizen. They challenged his citizenship at the border, at the port of entry. And this is big in immigration law because the immigration officer generally has the authority to let in a person, right? So they're saying you're not a U.S. citizen by our definition. Because of the Chinese Exclusion Act, they're challenging your right to claim citizenship. And he said, no, that's not true. I am a citizen. I was born here. I turned 21, I briefly left. But a citizen has a right to travel, does he not? And the court agreed with him, right? He got his cake and he got to eat it too, right? Rare case where you get both. However, the key question in this case is the court denoted two exceptions to the 14th Amendment. We're going to take a look at those right now. I'm going to open up the exact language, so we are not going to just paraphrase. We're going to look at the exact act, right? And I believe the terminology, scroll down. This is the syllabus of the Supreme Court case. Let's see.
And while we're looking for this specific language, the United States versus Wong Kim Ark states the right of citizens born to immigrant parents to uphold their citizenship. You know, a right that now Trump is trying to challenge, exactly.
Correct.
Is there any other legal precedent outside of the two exceptions that we find here of the opposite of what Trump is trying to do now in history, or is this the first time?
You mean specifically where the courts have ruled confirming birthright citizenship? Exception, if you could rephrase, what do you mean?
Denying birthright citizenship.
Outside of what Trump is trying to do.
Yes, exactly.
Outside of these two exceptions we're looking for. Not that I'm aware of, no. I'm sure that there might be legal arguments that creatively you can, try to conjure up.
Yeah.
Right? But to challenge the citizenship of an individual, especially if they're born in the US, right? Generally is very difficult. Unless they are deemed a traitor, they basically, by their own admission, if they're of sound mind and they give up their citizenship and they become a citizen of another country, right? That would be one exception, maybe, right? But to get rid of a individual citizenship while they are not consenting to it, it's very difficult to do.
So for all intents and purposes, this is groundbreaking territory, and it's a first for U.S. history.
It's a first in U.S. I mean, the U.S. has always tried. Let me be clear, right? They've tried to restrict the citizenship and humanity of minorities. There's countless cases. Korematsu comes to mind, where they were interning Japanese Americans, right? Because they were viewed in suspicion. And we'll actually discuss the Korematsu case as well down the line, actually, in this conversation. But Korematsu is one example. Then we have examples where, like the Chinese Exclusion Act, right?
Yeah.
They didn't consider Italian Americans to be Americans. So there's been a sort of history of people challenging it. But has there been a history of people challenging it intelligently and sort of methodically as Trump has? Not that I'm aware of, no. President Trump is making some very good legal arguments. And the reason I made this video is I want people to be aware that they shouldn't take it lightly. The opposition, meaning the general immigration public, right, of immigration lawyers who are arguing against Trump, have made many great arguments on their end why it's unconstitutional what he's doing.
Yeah.
But there have been many SCOTUS decisions in U.S. history that have been unconstitutional, and yet they've been implemented, right? Korematsu was one of them. So the U.S. has proven that just because something is at its face unconstitutional doesn't mean that it's going to get struck down necessarily. If he makes a good enough legal argument, the Supreme Court theoretically could reverse 150 years of constitutional bedrock law and either change the complete understanding of the 14th Amendment or restrict it.
Yeah.
Now, I don't think they're going to get rid of the 14th Amendment, but I think they will restrict it. It'll be the first domino if Trump wins, right?
Yeah.
And so the two exceptions that we were talking about is actually quoted in this case, United States v. Walmart, right? So he's saying, by the common law of England, this is Lord Chief Justice Cockburn, right? And they're citing him. The reason they're citing English law is because a lot of the law in America is based off of Old English law, starting with the Magna Carta, right?
Yeah.
So he's saying, and I'm going to zoom in a little bit if I can. He's saying that by the common law of England, every person born within the domains of the crown, no matter whether of English or of foreign parents, in the latter case whether the parents were settled or merely temporarily sojourning in the country, was an English subject. Save only the children, this is where it is, save only the children of foreign ambassadors who were accepted because their fathers carried their own nationality with them, or a child born to a foreigner during the hostile occupation of any part of the territories of England. No effect appears to have been given to the descent as a sort of nationality. So, do you understand what these two exceptions are?
Yes, one is with ambassadors, so representatives of countries who, in effect, carry their nationality with them wherever they go. In the second being when there's an army or an occupying force within the borders of, in this case, England, but in our example, the United States, who are then sort of violating the rights of that nation, so to speak.
Correct. And the key term is hostile occupation, right? And remember, the other key part is a foreigner, right? So it's a singular, it's not plural. And in law, we always look at the language very closely because the legal argument that you can make in court often changes very dramatically if the tools that you're playing with are very much restricted, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this is very broad. It's saying a foreigner. So it's not even necessarily an army. It could be a hostile individual, like a terrorist, for example, right? So by this argument, Osama bin Laden, let's say hypothetically, engineered, famously known for engineering 9/11, right? Being a part of it, organizing the horrible events that unfolded that day, right? If hypothetically he had a child in the United States, right, this definition, in this case, and understanding of common law as it applies to the 14th Amendment, would not be considered, his child would not be considered a U.S. citizen, even if born in U.S. soil, right? Now, President Trump wants to apply this definition, and he's made a very famous interview about it. We can look it up perhaps later down the line, where he stated that he's going to use the Alien Enemies Act and other similar acts to sort of make the argument that the immigrants who are coming into this country who are undocumented are engaged in as an invasion, as a wartime invasion of the United States. And if you look at the media recently, right, he's already making moves to sort of establish that on the record. He's ordered the United States Army to move to the southern border and to start fortifying the southern border, right? Now, President Trump can do this under a law called, it's a public law. It's called the Wartime Powers Act, right? And what this act does is it's codified as Public Law 93-148, right? And it allows the president concerning the war powers of Congress. So only Congress is constitutionally allowed to declare war. The president cannot declare war.
Mm-hmm.
Right? However, the president can, and in times of emergency, command the army to sort of fortify and protect the American borders and even fight the enemy, right? For a period of 60 days, maximum 60 days, right? But 60 days is 2 months. You can do a lot in 2 months. and he's ordered the army to now fortify the southern border. So he's already establishing on the record that this is an enemy, number one. They're engaged in a hostile occupation. What is hostile occupation? If you go back to that case we were talking about, right? Wong Kim, it's one of the exceptions. They're engaged in the hostile occupation of invading the country, according to President Trump. Invasion is an act of war.
To add to that, he's called them an army of immigrants.
An army of immigrants. They're organized, they're coming in, they're dangerous. He's used the term savages. He's used a lot of dehumanizing terms against them, right? So he's already labeling them as the other. So now it's all rhetoric, right? But words matter. How you view someone, label someone, can cause a public image to change, right? That's one thing he's done systematically. They're invading, correct? Okay, so that satisfies hostile occupation. Now, the other thing is, remember, it doesn't have to be an army. The reason he's using the word army is because, let's take a look at the Alien Enemies Act, right? It's saying an alien who is native, citizen, subject, or denizen of any country, state, or sovereignty with which the United States is at war, key term, after his loyalty has been fully established upon investigation by the Attorney General. Attorney General is required. Be naturalized as a citizen of the United States if such an alien's application of naturalization shall be pending. Is otherwise entitled to the admission of citizenship, right? But the exception is the Attorney General, in his discretion, may upon investigation, after fully establishing the loyalty of the alien enemy who did not have an application of naturalization pending at the beginning of the state of war, except such an alien enemy from the classification of alien enemy for the purposes of this subchapter, may thereupon have the privilege of filing the application for naturalization. So it's giving a lot of power to the executive branch, right, to determine, number one, who is at war, who is a hostile enemy, and who is engaged in the act of being a hostile enemy towards the United States. And it gives a lot of definition on what an alien is, right? And let's see if we can get a specific text. So the effect of cessation of hostilities. An alien who is a native, subject, denizen of any state sovereignty which the United States is at war, right, shall cease to be an alien enemy within the meaning of this section upon determination by the President or concurrent resolution of Congress, right? And the hostilities between the United States and such state of sovereignty have ended. So basically, the President, by this definition of subsection D, has the authority to declare, by definition, on who is a hostile alien, as long as Congress doesn't contradict him.
And this is even in the case where the war might still be going on, or purely after the end of hostilities or period of war between the two countries.
It's a great question. So if you look at the plain reading, right? So we're not even getting into statute, we're not getting into case law or whatever, we're just looking at the plain meaning of words, right? It suggests that, let's read, an alien who is a native, quote, 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 the United States is at war shall cease to be an alien enemy within the meaning of this section upon the determination by proclamation of the President. So the President can decide when the war is ended. The President can decide he's no longer an enemy, or he is an enemy for the alien, he or she, gender neutral, right? So the President decides by proclamation, this is an enemy, this is not an enemy. So Trump today, if his goal is, I want to get rid of undocumented immigrants, I'm going to label them as enemies. Tomorrow, if he wants them to start working again illegally, then they're not enemies anymore, right? So the President has that authority according to this act, just by plain reading, of course, right? So you have a situation now. Let's break this out step by step. You have a situation where President Trump can declare who is and who is not an enemy of the United States just by plain reading of this act. President can declare whether they're engaged in a hostile occupation, meaning they're coming in to invade our country, subvert our Constitution, give a threat to our lives of our U.S. citizens, and then automatically now that's an exception to the 14th Amendment based on the understanding of Wong Kim.
Yep.
Right? And so you get into a situation, and now remember, this is the other point. Now we're transitioning from law into politics a little bit, right? You have a scenario where the current government is controlled by the Republicans in majority. So you have a Republican majority court, Supreme Court, you got Republican majority in Congress, and you have the executive branch, of course, under President Trump, Republican, completely Republican, right?
Yeah.
So basically he is judge, jury, and executioner, theoretically, right? I'm not saying all is doom and gloom. What I'm saying is that if he can make a convincing, constitutionally sound argument why undocumented immigrants should not be considered as protected beneficiaries of the 14th Amendment, with these two exceptions, he has all the tools to make it happen.
Yeah, this definitely, it's very interesting because you have to formulate all these arguments and you have to paint a picture of a real and present threat within the borders of the country. Because like you said, bedrock constitutional
Provision, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And obviously I think it depends on the perspective of the judges. From my understanding, there's set to be 3 federal adjudications either this week or the next on this matter. And given that we saw the decision by this first judge, what was his name? Conahar, I believe.
Right.
You're
talking about the
correct, of the TRO. Yes.
Right.
Do you expect these judges to adjudicate similarly and find constitutional or unconstitutionality based on the present and real threat to American lives in the form of lack of social security, lack of safety nets, among other things I have here? It subjects people to the risk of deportation and family separation, or kind of just getting where do you see the issue moving forward? Is it likely, possibly, that they see it as constitutional and we have this immense and drastic change to something so fundamental?
Right. Well, I think that's a great point, and I think, frankly speaking, at the federal level, I think President Trump is going to get a lot of pushback. And the reason is that it's hard for Trump to change the court completely at the federal level, right? And I'm talking about at the lower trial level.
Mm-hmm.
There's more diversity of political opinion at that level. It's easy to appoint after one judge either retires or passes away at the Supreme Court, because it's only 9 justices, right? But it's much more difficult. I mean, not saying difficult procedurally, but I'm saying difficult in terms of application, because the federal courts, there's so many circuits, and there's a trial level, there's a circuit court level, and then it goes to the Supreme Court for Trump to effectively change from blue to red in those dimensions, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we had a similar case actually from a non-partisan perspective, actually, where Trump's actual executive order was blocked by a federal judge who was Republican.
Yeah,
right.
I saw earlier he was appointed by Ronald Reagan.
Exactly.
It just lets you know.
It lets you know. So this idea and the perception in the mind of the American public, regardless of political affiliation, that the 14th Amendment is a bedrock constitutional right, is deeply ingrained, right? So what Trump is trying to do is extraordinary in the sense of he's trying to subvert centuries of bedrock constitutional protections. What I suspect he wants to do is he wants to take this up all the way to the Supreme Court. He knows that a federal judge at that level is not going to allow it, right? If it does get allowed, here's what is going to happen. Let's say President Trump wins at the federal level in this case, right, in Seattle, hypothetically, right? He's not going to, but let's say he does. Then the government is going to appeal it to the circuit court. And if he fails in the circuit court, he's going to take it to SCOTUS, right? Similarly, if he loses, it's the same outcome. they're gonna appeal. The losing side will appeal, right? So the state of Washington will appeal in this case, right? If Trump wins or loses, he wins either way because he takes it to SCOTUS. Now, if he takes it to SCOTUS, there's a high chance with the judges that he has packed personally and appointed personally at that level that they're going to subvert this because no one can challenge SCOTUS.
Yeah, it's a gray area there because obviously there's a level of, it asks how partisan is the court, which they're not supposed to be, versus strict constitutionalists, which they're supposed to be legal scholars first and foremost.
Exactly.
Right? But given that he has stacked the court and it's 66%, it's 6 conservatives to 3 liberals at the time being, I see a possibility, I see a world where it does get overturned and we have a change in the 14th Amendment.
We do, but on the positive side, because I'm also an optimist, right?
Mm-hmm.
I've met many of the Supreme Court justices in person myself. I've had conversations with them, right? Particularly, I think Justice Gorsuch, I think, is a voice of reason. He is not a partisan or a politically motivated justice as much as some of his other co-justices are in the Republican side of the court, right? He's made many holdings in previous cases where either he was in the dissent, if it was a sort of decision that went against the Republican majority, right? Or he supported, but basically he's a constitutionalist at heart. He prefers a very literal meaning of plain reading of the Constitution. The plain reading is exactly what you are suggesting, which is the 14th Amendment, birthright citizenship, protects all.
Yes.
Right? But, like I said, Trump's arguments are not illegal. They're not revolutionary. They are revolutionary in the creativity, but they're definitely constitutionally bound, as in the Supreme Court case.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, the 2 exceptions we spoke about, right? They are constitutionally present. They are legal because Long Kim Ark is a long-standing landmark case. It's not anything new. It's been argued and decided in 1898.
Yeah, the precedent is there.
The precedent is there. And the 2 exceptions that we spoke about, diplomats, meaning ambassadors and, foreign government employees, right? The children of those individuals will not be considered U.S. citizens even if they're born here, right? And then the other exception is hostile occupation.
I think most of the argument hinges on whether he can apply that definition to the majority of immigrants,
Exactly.
right?
Because we all know they're not going to be diplomats. They're not going to label them as diplomats.
Yeah.
They're here to engage in diplomacy. That's not true.
And the question is whether, federal judges at the district court or circuit court, or even all the way up to the Supreme Court, whether they perceive or they understand that definition to be true.
Exactly.
Because while the numbers may be there, I think there are certain requirements for an army: uniformity, strategy, organization, communication, all of these things that must be taken into consideration.
Absolutely.
But who knows?
Yeah, absolutely. Who knows? And going into that, let's talk about a reality where Trump wins.
Yeah.
Let's say, contrary to what everyone is saying,
Mm-hmm.
let's say all of the liberals are wrong, and it turns out Trump is correct, and the Supreme Court holds that he's correct, right? What will be the outcome in immigration law? Let's discuss that a little bit, right? Let's say now the 14th Amendment, based on Trump's arguments, right? So let's take a look at Trump's argument. What is he trying to accomplish with this, right? He's saying, let's take a look at his executive order. He's saying among the categories of individuals born in the United States and not subject to the jurisdiction thereof, the privilege of United States citizenship automatically does not automatically extend to persons born in the United States in the following categories. Number 1, when the person's mother was unlawfully present in the U.S. and the father was not a citizen or lawful permanent resident at the time of the birth, right? So scenario one, where neither parents are legal, they're illegal, right? Undocumented, right? Scenario two, when the person's mother's present in the U.S. of said time of person's birth was lawful but temporary. Lawful but temporary, right? Which is not limited to visiting the U.S. under the auspices of the visa waiver program, or visiting on a student, work, or tourist visa. Basically, he's saying if you're on a visa, right, a temporary visa, like a visitor's visa, a student visa, a tourist visa. And in that scenario, the mother has such a visa and the child is born.
So it's setting the bar at LPR, lawful permanent resident, or U.S. citizen for any descendant of that person, mother, father,
Correct.
to gain citizenship.
Well, to not be subject to the protections of the 14th Amendment. If they're lower than that,
Then they don't receive them.
they don't have it.
Yes.
They don't receive it.
Correct.
The children don't.
Mm-hmm.
And if you cut off the children from citizenship, those parents will never get it legally. Because the only other way they can get citizenship, parents, right, is asylum. And let's face it, Trump's already talking about cutting asylum. He's already made several actions on that. The Mexico policies implemented it, so now you have to adjudicate your asylum case from Mexico. That gets rid of the right of many of these undocumented immigrants from being given access to an attorney, a U.S. attorney who could represent them.
Yeah.
Right? He's implemented another executive order where he's going to get rid of the right to even have a trial with a judge. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later. If the undocumented immigrant's been here for 2 years or less, no trial, no judge, no lawyer, boom, deported instantly if ICE catches you,
Yes.
right? And remember, this is for undocumented, or he's even stated in that order, any persons who cannot prove their legal status. So technically, they could nab a visa holder who just doesn't happen to have a copy of their visa. And I mean, come on, let's face it, most people don't, carry everything with them in their pockets. I certainly don't. If you're foreign looking enough, you do not have your ID. If you don't speak English properly or at all, it's a challenge. So there's a lot of misuse and abuse of government power that can go with this executive order. Yeah.
That seems very gray, just, blurring the lines of legality, especially that second one, where they can detain people and deport them without any sort of due process.
Correct.
But going back to the 14th Amendment, as far as how this will apply, obviously this is going to remove any possibility for citizenship for millions of people coming into this country.
Correct.
From here on out into the future.
Correct.
It doesn't have any impact on those who are currently or have already had children, correct? Doesn't go into the past.
No, but what it does say is it's talking about birth, right? So if you're talking about people who are already born, they're safe, basically, right? They're grandfathered in, they're protected under the previous interpretation.
Yes.
However, there are many individuals who have been here for decades and they're still waiting for their green card, right? They're still on the visa, pending visa status. They haven't gotten their I-485 processed, right? It's still pending. And their lives cannot be put on hold if they have children. If this takes into effect, those children will not be considered citizens. And you have a scenario where someone's been here for 10, 15 years. Remember, right? You cannot leave the United States if you have a pending immigration application, unless you get an advanced parole, which again, Trump can get rid of that just as well.
And it takes time.
And it takes at least 30 to 45 days.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. And that's assuming that's even granted,
Mm-hmm.
right? So this is going to be disastrous for many individuals, like you said, who are below the LPR level. That's going to be the first effect of this, right?
I think that's where you'll see the most impact. Because if you're here on a visa, it's likely that you haven't been here very long.
Correct.
And obviously, even if your intention is to stay, then through asylum or parole or other means, then you're still going to feel that impact. But I mean, we've worked with many individuals who've been here 10, 20 years, and regardless of the legality or the morality, that can be argued, but it's just those are the present facts, and that's the reality that some people have lived. And to the idea that they can then be forced to be sent back through the threat of deporting their children, who can then not be given citizenship, is awful.
It's awful. And here's the thing: if people say, "Oh, but those countries will never accept those people back," that's not true either. As we've seen in the media recently in the news, President Trump basically strong-armed Mexico into accepting not just Mexican nationals back from the U.S., right, but other Hispanic people from other countries. And now Mexico agreed to be a temporary holding facility for all those undocumented immigrants. And Trump said if Mexico didn't agree, he would impose tariffs on them. And they basically agreed because the U.S. has a very big advantage when it comes to trade law. And many of these countries depend upon U.S. products and often other services that the United States provides. If they stop it, the United States would be fine, because the United States is not as dependent upon other countries as other countries are dependent upon the United States. Not saying that's true for every country, but certainly true for many of our Latin American countries.
Yeah, our neighbors in the South.
The neighbors in the South, right? Even Canada. So, yeah, they've been strong-armed. Canada's been strong-armed. It's going to be a lot of interesting developments with immigration law. Definitely.
Yeah, this only being one of them.
This is only one of them. This is the tip of the iceberg as far as I see it, right?
Absolutely.
And
it's a huge iceberg.
exactly. And as Trump says, nothing in this order shall be construed to affect the entitlement of other individuals, including children of lawful permanent residents, to obtain documentation of their U.S. citizenship, right? So,
and look at subsection A there. So,
subsection A, you're talking about here?
B, yes. Subsection A of this section shall apply, shall apply only to persons who are born in the U.S. after 30 days from the date of this order. Now, does that not apply? Is that still paused because of the TRO?
So, correct. Now, they can challenge because the TRO challenged the entire order, right? So this is a subsection of that order. So basically, this is with the assumption that
was accepted,
that the order is implemented.
Yes.
Now, they're not using the word implemented. They're saying from the date of this order, right? But if the order itself, it's like a contract, if the order itself is challenged, then the other provisions underlying it would be challenged as well.
Okay.
Correct.
Okay.
So in effect, you're not going to see this happening until, the case is adjudicated.
Exactly. So it's not as though it was passed on January 20th, that section doesn't apply on February 20th, rather it has to be accepted first and 30 days past that date.
Well, this is assuming that the TRO is accepted by the judge, and this is, a scenario where this entire case and the preliminary injunction / TRO is fully accepted and fully processed. And
Yeah.
it's to the benefit, right? But remember, it says in the argument is that for a 14-day TRO,
It's coming up
right?
soon, like 2 days.
Exactly. So this TRO it's stating that let's see, if the court grants a plaintiff state's emergency motion for a 14-day TRO effective at 11 a.m. January 23rd, right? So we have to look into the sort of docket for this case, right, to see if the TRO was granted. But just at this point, without looking it up, let's say if it was granted, right, it would have been only implemented for 14 days past January 23rd. After that, the TRO, unless they ask for an extension on the TRO, would be revoked.
Yep.
Right? So that means that order would be implemented at that point.
Okay. Yeah, so this is happening very quickly.
Correct. And you can make arguments to toll the time and to change the time based on this court case, etc. If you were a plaintiff, right, who's challenging Trump's order. But in effect, the order's language is very clear. It's from the moment that they sign the order. So from that point, January 20th plus 30 days, anyone in that time range is safe from the order. Anything after that, it's according to what the order says.
And I imagine, it's likely, it's a possibility that you have kids born on the 20th
Of course.
that are U.S. citizens, and those on the 21st are not, or the 19th and the 20th, actually, I think is the dates.
No. It's 30 days from the time the order is implemented. So from the time that the order was written, right? So let's go back to the order. It was
January 20th.
January 20th. It says the subsection provision says shall apply only to persons who are born within the United States after 30 days of this order.
Mhm.
Keyword is after.
Yeah.
So add 30 to January 20th.
It's February 19th.
Correct. That would be the day where any kid who's born who falls outside of the exceptions based on what President Trump has listed, they would not be protected by the 14th Amendment.
Wow.
Presuming that this order is not held to be unconstitutional in a court of law.
Of course.
This is all presuming that this order is 100% legitimate and the courts are going to eventually find that this order is constitutional, right? But this is a historical case. And many people say it's impossible, it's a bedrock foundation. But as I hinted earlier, there have been many cases in US history where there are, unconstitutional policies and laws were held to be constitutional. Korematsu is a big one. And Korematsu, if you remember the case, is about the loyalty, citizenship, and internment of Japanese Americans, right? They were held to be Americans because they were born here, but they were interned, unconstitutional, right? And why? Because of their ancestry. They said, oh, well, it's possible that they would hold loyalties to Japan, who we were at war with, because of their ethnicity, right? Unconstitutional idea that they held it constitutional,
Mm-hmm.
based on a policy fear, right? So the policy fear here is, oh, well, you're afraid that all these bad Hispanic hombres are going to come from the southern border. They're going to invade America. They're going to, and as Trump has indicated many times, they're going to rape, kill, he's implied they're savages, right? And that's fear. Same thing as Korematsu.
Mm-hmm.
Fear of the other, fear of the outside, right? And so that will create a policy reason for the Supreme Court, assuming that they go in that direction, to essentially implement these two exceptions.
Yeah, it's drastic, without a doubt. This has been a robust conversation, and it's heavy. It's heavy stuff.
It's heavy. And I know you being of Hispanic descent, right? You have strong feelings about this, I'm presuming. I certainly do. I'm an Indian American, and I know many people in my community who are heavily reliant upon the H-1B visa. And they're afraid that because it's not LPR, it's below LPR, their children are not going to be given this, U.S. citizenship status, which otherwise they did before.
Yeah, and it complicates it because obviously getting a visa of that nature is, relatively easier compared to applying for and processing and acquiring,
Of course.
LPR, permanent residence.
Very
So,
Very difficult.
Bottom line, if this passes, we're going to see far, far less U.S. permanent residents being accepted.
Exactly. And there's a whole policy argument on how bad that effect would be, right? Because America relies on foreign labor in many of its industries. certainly I was having discussions with some of my clients who are undocumented and who are, filing for asylum and all these benefits. One of my clients, like very intelligently and I would say almost in a legal fashion, argued that, okay, let's say they deport all of us. Who's going to do all of the labor jobs, like restaurant jobs, farm jobs? It's going to cause inflation. No one here wants to do those jobs, right? There's a reason why people from foreign countries are hired for those jobs. Supply and demand, basic economics. If you deport all the people who are producing all of our food, taking care of our cities, doing all of the jobs, and Americans arguably don't want to do at much cheaper price, right? Because they would charge higher wages. That money is going to come out of someone's pocket, and usually that's the taxpayers, the middle class. So everyone's going to have inflation. Food prices are going to go up. Certain services won't be offered. Certain foods won't be offered. There's so many economic considerations of this as well.
Alluding to a comment you made earlier, it's not just the domino effect in one direction of citizenship, but also in several other aspects of society and the economy and politics and everything else. Yeah,
it's a rabbit hole we can get into, ifs and buts, right?
Mm-hmm.
But based on this conversation, at least I personally believe that President Trump has a solid chance of changing the scope, is what I like to call it, the 14th Amendment. And it really depends upon the 9 Supreme Court justices that we have, right? Specifically, the Republican have the majority, right? The 6, what direction they're going to go. And if they go towards the direction that most people think is impossible, you could have a Korematsu-like scenario here. Because remember, Trump cannot declare war. That's a congressional power, right? But there's 2 things. The 60-day quasi-war emergency provision, the Wartime Powers Act, right? That allows President Trump to use U.S. troops. He sends that political message that we have an emergency, securing the southern border.
Wong Kim Ark, that language of hostile occupants, and then the Code of Federal Regulations, the Alien
Enemies Act.
Yes. Right. Compiling those 3 arguments, he has a solid base, a solid chance. Exactly.
And I mean, I made this argument, and it's funny because I was having a conversation with some of the other attorneys, right, in my network on LinkedIn about this. And I made this exact argument here in one of my posts pertaining to this very topic. And in this argument here, I basically am predicting that President Trump is going to really rely on 2 legal foundations, from what I'm thinking, right, to win his case. Because he doesn't have many arguments he can make. It's a bedrock constitutional provision. So you can only rely on the exceptions, right? And if you want to rely on exceptions to a long-standing rule, you have to use terms of art. And terms of art means that specifically the language that labels undocumented immigrants as enemies of war, right? Foreign enemies. That's what he's going to do with the Alien Enemies Act, right here. And the other thing he's going to do is the War Powers Resolution Act, of 1973. He cited that one too. So he's citing long-standing acts. And then, of course, United States, Wong Kim Ark, which was ironically a case that favored immigrants, right? It might well be used as a foundation to limit immigrants in this case. They might definitely not cite Wong Kim Ark, but you can't have a conversation about the 14th Amendment and birthright citizenship without Wong Kim Ark. It's like the founding Supreme Court case for this legal topic. And I think ultimately what it comes down to is the person's mother being unlawfully present and the status of the father. It comes down to those 2 things. If it's LPR or below, everyone's at risk. If you're LPR and above, you're fine.
If it's LPR and below?
Sorry, below LPR, technically.
Oh.
If you have to be precise with the language. Below LPR, yeah. And remember, LPR, legal permanent status, right, our residency is it's very easy to lose that. I've had many clients who have committed a statutory violation, i.e. a criminal act, and they lose their LPR
Yes.
if they're convicted. Now people think, oh, well, I'm a normal person. How does that affect me? I'm not going to get convicted. I don't commit crimes.
And in that case, their children will continue having citizenship, but theirs will be revoked.
Well, no, I was going on a different route by making that statement.
Mm.
I was saying that the definition of a crime, it doesn't mean you're a bad person, right? In the 1800s, helping slaves escape from slavery was a crime, right? So society can make laws that are very much good, or sorry, very much bad, but just because it's a law, you have to follow it.
Yeah.
Right? So what I'm saying is it's very easy right now in many states, for example, to get convicted of a crime, even if the alleged crime is not really a dangerous or a really criminal act, right? There's many laws that are arguably, policy-wise, not really hardcore criminal acts. Then there's the act of, let's say, an innocent act of speeding. Now, I'm not advocating speeding, but in Virginia, for example, if you drive 20 miles over the speed limit, just the number 20, right? Which there's many cases where people have an emergency, why they're speeding, and if the court finds hypothetically that there's no excuse for them speeding, now they're a criminal because they've engaged in the act of reckless driving, right? Now, if you get convicted of that with an LPR status, I'm not even talking about being undocumented or having a visa. I'm talking about having a green card, and you get convicted of that, you lose your green card status with immigration law, because you cannot be a criminal and a legal permanent resident at the same time, a convicted criminal. So you lose that LPR status, and now you're subject to deportation proceedings. Oh, and on top of that, if you have a kid, or if you had a child at the time you lost your status, not saying while you had your status, but I'm saying the time you lost your status, right? Let's play a hypothetical game. Let's say you got a guy who has a green card, and his wife's pregnant, right? And his wife is about to have a baby, right? And she hasn't had the baby, but she's having one of those false pregnancy delivery scenarios, right? Mm-hmm. She thinks she's gonna have a baby, and she's asking him to take her to the hospital, right? He takes her to the hospital, but he's scared that she's gonna have a baby. He speeds in Virginia, 20 miles over, right? Let's say it's in a district where they're not as friendly towards foreign people, and he gets, somewhere down south of Virginia, right, near Richmond, and he gets convicted of reckless driving, just for argument's sake, right? And in that time, while his case is going on, right, it's been about 6 months. She was 3 months due when this whole thing started. So we're 9 months now, and she's basically now at the point where she's about to deliver the baby, but he's lost his LPR status.
No longer a citizen.
LPR. No, he was never a citizen. No longer a green card.
The child.
Oh, the child. Yes, you're correct. No longer a citizen.
Yeah.
If this order is implemented and successfully challenged. Now, do you see a scenario like that?
Yeah.
It's very plausible,
Mm-hmm.
right? And regardless of where we come from, right, all immigrants, this country was founded on immigrants, right? No ethnicity, no nationality can claim, aside from the Native Americans, of course, that this is their native country. We're a nation of immigrants. We all came at one point or another from another country, right? And this country was founded by immigrants, right? So the idea of being an immigrant is heavily associated with the idea of being an American. And policies like this may take it away. We're sending a message to the world that now America is something else. It's not a safe haven for immigrants anymore. I think that'll bring, from a policy perspective, a lot of decline in the quality of personnel. We won't have an environment where we tell the best of the best in the world to come to our country, just because we fear the worst of the worst coming into our country.
Great way of putting it.
Absolutely. So yeah, do you have any additional points or questions you wanted to discuss about this, or do you think we've hit the nail on this, man?
I think we've hit the nail.
Absolutely. I think we have hit the nail. So yeah, this was a great discussion, man, and I certainly hope that I'm wrong. I want to be wrong on this, right? Not many lawyers want to be wrong, but I feel that being the devil's advocate here, man, I feel like there is a strong chance he will get this passed.
Mm-hmm. We'll just have to wait and see. But thank you for this conversation. It was enlightening and it was very interesting. I realized things along the way of like, oh my God, this is actually the scope and the extent of the consequences that might arise. So we'll definitely be keeping an eye out, both on a personal level and for the firm. And we'll see you again soon for the next podcast, right?
Absolutely. And I'm not going anywhere.
Yeah.
Certainly you're not. All right. Take care, my friend.
Okay. See
All
you.
right. See you.